Hey, Foley.
Hey, good afternoon, Colin, Sandy. How are you doing?
Good, good, man. How are you?
I'm
Hello.
doing well, thank you.
Good.
How's your tests coming on, Sandy? For Tazama 4.0?
Yeah, good. Making progress, eh? Solved quite a lot of severity, kind of high and blocking bugs. So we're getting there.
Great to hear. Do
But every
you
time I look
update
at
the
something, I
tests?
think, oh, new feature request, that would be nice. This would be nice.
Do you update the tests on the folder in GitHub every now and then, or not really?
No, at this stage, I've mainly been doing end-to-end testing and UI testing in case management system and then focusing on dashboards. So primarily end to end. I haven't really focused on at all on Rule Studio or Connection Studio.
Okay. Okay, sounds good.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Justice.
Right, let's see. Who do we have? Hello, Matt, Ben, Josh, the entire
Hello.
Majid and Foley. Some 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 of our community as well. Okay, let me share the presentation. We just came out of another meeting, so Greg will be along shortly, I'm sure. Thanks everybody for joining us. You are all familiar with our antitrust policy notice. If you have any questions, and if you have a lawyer you can talk to, please have that conversation with them. On our agenda for today, we're going to do quick feedback on our Tazama 4.0 public beta testing program report. We are in the process now also of winding down the beta testing. We would like to go into our release cycle. There are a couple of outstanding bugs that we hope to fix and resolve before that. But hurtling inevitably towards our release is our objective at the moment. So we want to get this release out very, very soon. We're also going to be talking a little bit about our Kubernetes deployment working group. Foley, if you have a slide deck, you can share it. Otherwise, if you just want to give us some quick feedback of our session this week, that is also fine. And then just a quick product update here, and some changes in the administration service. There was a outstanding TSC ticket that we have closed since the last TSC, so we're just going to quickly walk through that. Let me put that on Dex along. And then I'll show you what that looks like. Okay. Any questions before we begin? Alrighty. Okay, beta testing. Sandy, would you like to quickly walk us through the stats here?
Yes, sure. So there's been quite a bit of movement on the end-to-end testing of putting transactions through the TMS API and then into case and investigation management. So we can see quite a big jump in those numbers. There hasn't been a lot of movement on Rule Studio or Connection Studio. But we have in the last week or two seen some beta testing activity from 3 or 4 new tenants who haven't been testing up until now. So that's been good to see. Next slide, Justice. We have also received feature requests and a bug from one of the tenants doing beta testing. So that's been really great to have some other ideas and contributions from the community on gaps and feature requests. We are definitely moving in the right direction in that a number of blocking bugs have been resolved. There have been some new bugs and issues recorded, but definitely moving in the right direction. Still, you can see a focus predominantly on BIR, case management and investigations. I think that's where the effort is at the moment going into testing, and we're seeing that in the results of the discussions that are being opened with either bugs or questions or feature requests. Next, Justice.
No, next, I think it's back to me.
Back to you.
Yeah, but as we mentioned, we are intending to wrap up the testing in the next week at the most, and then also get all of these final bugs out so that we can cut our release and hand over Tazama 4.0 to the community. So very much looking forward to that. We have a DevOps release engineer who's going to be helping us with that process. Foley, you may know who that is. We'll be getting some assistance in getting our release out. Hopefully soon. Thank you very much for everybody who's contributed to the beta testing program so far. It's really been great to see the activity and the engagement with the platform. I hope everybody else is as excited as we are to get the release 4 out and up and running. Then just some feedback topically on the Helm chart and the Kubernetes-based deployment for Tazama. Foley, over to you.
Alrighty. I will be sharing my screen.
Oh, let me stop sharing.
Thank you. All right, I didn't prepare a whole deck today, so I'll just be talking to the slide with the information regarding the working group and who's been attending and where the discussion can be followed for anyone that's interested. While I talk through what we had discussed this week. So there was a contribution from one of the attendees, Dom. He contributed a working Helm chart that they're using on their environment to get Tazama up and running, Tazama 4.0. So that was very exciting. Then he took us through it at a high level to show us how it works and how it works through Helm and what sort of abstraction he had done and whatnot. That brought a bunch of discussions going on where after you've deployed your Tazama setup, there's some data that needs to be seeded, the schema for the database, as well as the actual typology and rule configuration and network maps and all of that. So we had a bit of a discussion regarding how that would work. Even though it is possible to do it through Helm itself, by making use of something like the entry points in Helm after something like Postgres is up. We had a discussion and thought it better that we should have the seeding of data as a separate step that would more or less mirror your promotion from a testing environment to a prod-like environment or from a dev to EAT. You would need to have that sort of promotion. So we thought we're trying to build something that will work in all scenarios. So if we set something up that will only work on deployment time, then when you do that promotion, you have to figure something out anyway. So yeah, I think that was quite valuable discussions that we had. There was some additional information to try and use our own internal developed services. For example, the admin service to see the data so that we do not have to go to the database directly. Make use of the services that are there. That's what we were discussing and sort of agreed upon. We were also then talking about Keycloak and how to seed Keycloak and what do we want to seed by default if you deploy Tazama. Do you get all the roles that Tazama work with, or do we suggest to add the users as well? We'll probably revisit that conversation as we sort of ran out of time while we were figuring that out. There were some ideas to ship it with users as well, the default users, but then we were worried that if all the default users are there and someone forgets to update the admin passwords, then that was a concern raised. So we'll probably revisit that. And so it was a very valuable session, and we actually got a lot done in terms of we had Helm charts contributed. So now it's sort of kicked us off well on the way. So yeah, we're very excited about that. Shout out to Dom. I haven't seen him on the call today. But yes, on the call today, Brian was also there. So thanks for your attending, Brian. In the next session, we will continue to review the current Helm deployment. Oh, so we had some homework. So anybody wanting to attend, we want to take a look at what is on the current Tazama Helm charts, so that we can keep that as we can figure out if what do we want to keep from the current Tazama Helm charts, and what do we not care to take over. So then we will sort of compare what we can do with the current contribution for the, let's call them the 2B Helm charts. What other features will we need to look at adding it there? And that will sort of build a roadmap of what will need to happen. So anyone that wants to join the next session, please be sure to review the current Helm charts. And then we'll sort of have a good discussion regarding what do we want to keep and what don't we worry too much about missing. All right, that's it from me. Justice, back to you.
Thank you, Foley. And as Foley mentioned, it was really encouraging for somebody from the community to have actually been able to stand up Tazama using the Helm charts and the our Docker Compose environment as a sort of a baseline template. So thank you very much to Dom in his absence for doing the work on that and also helping us to understand a little bit more about the environment, the direction that we want to go into with the Kubernetes deployment. And thanks, Foley, for the feedback. Any questions for Foley out of this before we move on? Alrighty. And moving on to the last segment here. We had made two, I think, fairly significant updates to the config service in the admin service at the moment. And this was also to dovetail with some of the requirements that Foley mentioned in the Helm chart. So before we used or did our migration from ArangoDB to Postgres, ArangoDB had its own APIs that gave you direct access to the database. So as long as you were an authenticated user on those APIs, you were able to interact directly with the data in the database. In our early review, when we started thinking about implementing authentication, that ingress was identified as a potential cybersecurity risk because it increases the attack surface of the database in the system. Even though obviously the ArangoDB API would be very secure, it provides yet another point of access to the system that you would typically want to avoid in a production setting. So using the ArangoDB APIs to interact directly with the database to create configurations and maintain configurations was less than ideal. When we switched to Postgres, we lost access to that API. And since then, we have been gradually migrating all of the services into the admin service API. So the admin service API now is responsible for interacting with all of the configuration data in the system. And you would do that as an authenticated user. And as soon as you do that as your authenticated user, you would also be ring-fenced to your tenancy inside the system. So you would only see the configuration schema for your tenant, and you wouldn't be able to see this configuration schema for any of the other tenants. And it also allowed us to separate and offer tenants their own evaluation space from scratch. So all of that is now possible. When we looked at, we did that migration for Tazama 3.0, and the implementation of the configuration services API into the admin service API was part of that release. We were doing some rigorous testing now as part of our beta testing, and there were some shortfalls in that initial implementation that we found that we wanted to fix. The first two of those was that you had to post a rule processor's configuration or a typology processor's configuration one at a time. We've now expanded those endpoints to be able to handle an array input. So instead of having to submit, at least when you are configuring the system for the first time, over 30 different API calls in succession, you are now able to submit all of those rule configurations and typology configurations with a single call, which makes it a little bit easier to use as well, at least for a configuration perspective. And then the second endpoint we added there was a very specific network map activation endpoint, and I'll show you the reason for that on the following slide. But previously, if you wanted to change the state of a network map, and remember the network map in the system is the central artifact that controls all of the evaluation behavior in the system. So if you are updating a network map and there's only one active network map in the system, you have to also simultaneously deactivate the previous network map. And when you called the update endpoint on the service, you basically had to send it the entire network map again, now with a new flag, which kind of defeats the purpose of the network map as an auditable artifact, because when somebody changes its active status, they can also change the network map, which is something that we wanted to avoid. So for that purpose, we created the network map activation endpoint that deliberately separates the network map creation and the network map update from a network map. I just want to make this one active. And when I make this one active, I'm going to simultaneously make the other one inactive. And the way that the system will handle that now is as a single transaction. So the entire active and deactive will happen as a combined instruction to the database, and it'll either fail together or succeed together. So it minimizes the opportunity for a gap to exist between the active and inactive network maps when you are making that change. The second challenge we had here, and I'm going to go on to the next slide for that. The second challenge we had is when you do update the network map, the downstream processors don't know about it. And this is a problem in particular for the typology processor and the event adjudicator over here. The event director is fine, more or less. At the moment, it has a cached version of the old network map, and that cache will eventually time out. And when it does time out, it will then read the new network map. but that does create a bit of a delay in your adoption. So you kind of have to wait for the cache to time out before you can load the new network map. And if you are deliberately changing the network map in the system, you ideally want that to happen at a time of your choosing. So that's the event director would be almost fine. The problem with the typology processor and the event adjudicator is they subscribe to their event flow backwards. So you need to tell them what their pickup lines are going to be for them to monitor those lines to get future traffic. And you can't do that from behind because they don't know to fetch the right information. So you need to actually update them while they are running and then tell them to subscribe backwards to their new endpoints. So it is a bit of a challenge for us. In the past and up to date, what you had to do when you wanted to adopt a new network map is you had to reboot all three of these components. And then those components would refresh, and from that reboot, they would read the latest network map from the database, and then they would create all of their subscriptions, and then your system would work fine. But that is not ideal for a running solution. So what we did here is we created a service that runs off the back of the network map activation. So if you are activating your new version of the network map, it would automatically then, as soon as the database has been updated successfully, it would then trigger an update through a new service channel and then communicate with each of these new processors that monitor that service channel to pick up that particular instruction, and then they would perform a specific function or an activity. So the event director's job here would be to say, I'm just going to drop my cache. Because the event director's natural behavior is that if it cannot find the network map in memory that it is looking for, it will fetch it from the database. So all we needed to do was to tell the event director to drop cache. And then simultaneously for the others, for the typology processor and for the event adjudicator, we had to tell them to resubscribe to their endpoints, but with a catch. Because ideally, you would want to do this work when the system is empty, but there may still be transactions in flight. And the only way to accommodate that is to subscribe to both the previous endpoints and the new endpoint simultaneously, and let the system naturally drain of the transactions that was used with the old network map, and then you can do a cleanup later. The cleanup is still outstanding, but the impact on the system's performance is relatively trivial. So from a cleanup perspective, we're not particularly worried about that right now, but that is also something that you can do later. And as soon as you reboot these processors, those old subscriptions will be cleaned up anyway. So it's not really a big deal. We're kind of okay with it for now. So these two processors over here then do an additive subscription with the new network map. So when they receive the in-progress transactions with the old network map, they will still complete them successfully. And then when they receive the new transactions with the new network map, they will then also be able to process them successfully. The activation itself here has two modes. There is a broadcast mode, which basically says everybody who is able to listen to this message and act on it can pick it up and then perform their particular functions. Or in the particular instance of a network map update for a live system, you want to run this in a cascade fashion. And in a cascade fashion, it actually populates the network map backwards. So before it sends the transaction to the event director, it makes sure that the typology processor is ready to receive. Before it sends it to the typology processor, it makes sure that the event adjudicator is ready to receive. So in a new implementation, a broadcast is probably fine. In a running implementation, you definitely want to do a cascading deployment of the network map, in which case it will then deploy the network map in stages back to front. And for that purpose also, we have an acknowledgement subject that's been created here. So as soon as any of these processors have received their instruction from the service channel and then acted on it successfully, they would populate the acknowledgement that goes back to the administration service so that the admin service can handle this cascade. Because then the admin service will wait for a successful response from the event adjudicator about the deployment. Then it will send the instruction to the typology processor, and then it will send the instruction to the event director. All right. And I want to show you quickly what that looks like. So if we go here, let's put that over there. And then let's put this over here. So this is Postman. So at the moment, if we look into the system, you can see our current network map is version 1, and these are the config management endpoints that we've created here. And now I can say, if I look at, there's a version 2 on here as well. So if I look at that one, we can see that this one is currently inactive, setting as active false. And typically what we would then do is, if I want to activate this network map, I would call my endpoint here, the configuration for version 2 with a reload mode of cascade. And if you watch the admin service on this side, you should see the messages coming through that handles all of the acknowledgements. So that's fairly quick. So it has updated the event adjudicator. It has updated the typology processor, and then finally the event director. So now if I send through a new transaction in the system here, let's do this one here. And I retrieve the result from that. You will now see that I'm using the configuration version 2 instead of the configuration version 1, and I did not have to reboot any of my processors to do that. Okay. And that is pretty much that. Any questions on this implementation? Tolly.
Hello, well done for getting this there. It's been a long time coming. So
Yes.
first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
And then the actual question, does it scale? So how
should.
how did we set up NATs so that if there are, for example, 5 typology processes or 5 instances of the TP, how will the admin service know if every single instance of the TP has acknowledged?
So you will have sort of a slight delay. So how it works is, when a processor currently subscribed to the NATS endpoints for the transaction evaluation, those endpoints are in a group configuration. So any of your typology processors in the group will collectively subscribe to that subject, and it round robins it. So when a particular message is submitted to one of those endpoints, one of those typology processor replicas will pick it up, and then the others will not. And that's how the scaling works at the moment, naturally.
Mm-hmm.
When we are broadcasting the update, we broadcast it outside of the group. So it actually goes to all of those individual processors themselves. The challenge here that we have found is, when the acknowledgements come back, the admin service itself doesn't know how many typology processor replicas actually exist. That's information that only exists in Kubernetes, and the admin service doesn't have access to that count from Kubernetes. So what we have decided to do in the short term is to say, if we get a acknowledgement back for any of these, then we will assume that at least one of them has it, and at least one of those replicas is then properly subscribed. The risk you have here is that there might be a slight imbalance in the scaling, because if not all of your processors have processed it in time, for a very brief period, you may find that one of your processors is doing most of the work on one of the new network maps. But there's no way at the moment for us to kind of count them off to say, we know that there are 5 typology processors, and we have received an acknowledgement from 5 typology processors, so now we can proceed to updating the event director. So it's a problem that we've decided should be okay for a short while. This is something that you might want to monitor then in your processor monitoring if you are worried about it when you are rolling out a network map, to make sure that that eventually smooths out. Because the challenge or the risk you might have here is if only one of those 5 topology processor replicas updated, and for whatever reason the other 4 failed, then that imbalance in your scaling is going to persist until you fix it. And for that reason, we also created the second endpoint here, where you can literally just force the reload of the network map anyway without updating the database. So it would then just re-trigger sort of on an idempotent basis that update to all of these processors anyway. And you can just keep on doing that until you're sure they all got the message. Does that answer the question?
Yep. No, it does answer the question. I think we had some designs or pictures that we had drawn earlier, where the only way we could foresee at that point was to use the other setup instead of NATs out the box, to use the Jetstream setup, because that way every single instance you can actually wait for the ACK of every single instance. So subscribe to that NATs topic. So that's an alternative.
When I looked at using Jetstream for this, Jetstream acknowledges the receipt onto the subject, but you can't tell whether or not everybody has picked it up. You can only tell when it's no longer there. And even that isn't entirely sort of guaranteed. So the sort of routing through with the acknowledgement was the only other way that we could do it here. And then that uses the existing NATS implementation. We do have a ticket on our backlog for the TSC to evaluate a Jetstream implementation across the system at large. One of the things that we can't do with the NATS implementation is to monitor back pressure, to be able to handle things like scaling or rate limiting of the API or anything like that. That's only possible with Jetstream. So that's something that we will be evaluating at the TSC in the future. And when we implement Jetstream for that, we will also evaluate Jetstream for the service channel.
Nope.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Perfect. There is one outstanding issue here on the multi-rule and multi-typology posting. Oh, Majid, go for it.
Yeah, I put a question in the chat. Sorry. I just want to know if I might have missed it, but the earlier updates, I want to know what the impact on performance is, if that's been measured.
The impact on performance in general at the moment?
Yeah, in general. at the moment, yeah.
We haven't re-benchmarked the system right now, but I can tell you from our experience in using the system at the moment, when we had our previous sandbox running on ArangoDB on an AWS cluster or an AWS instance, that instance was able to handle 1 to 2 transactions per second with the infrastructure that we had provisioned at the time. The only change that we had made since then was moving from ArangoDB to Postgres, along with a number of additional functionalities and enhancements. But we are now, I was able to ingest and evaluate transactions on our current sandbox at about 50 transactions per second. So, and I think that increase in performance that we are seeing is largely as a result of the Postgres implementation over the ArangoDB and all of the improvements that we had made in interacting with the database and streamlining the queries using SQL and so on. But the system does need to go through a formal benchmarking process at some point to be able to tell us exactly what the current performance is like. But performance does appear to have improved. And it's something that we were also quite happy to see Just as a hypothesis, we hoped it would be better, and we're happy to see that it looks like it is better. And to be honest, Postgres also may be slightly easier to cluster and scale based on how established and mature it is and how open that information is. When we were trying to scale ArangoDB, there was actually very little publicly available information for that. And even with us working directly with the ArangoDB teams to help us scale our infrastructure, we had somewhat limited success. So I think with Postgres as our back end, I'm very optimistic that we'll be able to achieve even better results. Foley, I don't know if you have a view here as well. I know you guys have been working on this space.
Yeah, that's basically been the sentiment, is that we ended up going with we started originally with Jetstream because you get the nice things like guaranteed delivery, and you get all the monitoring and the guaranteed acts and acts and all of those type of things. So it did work very nicely, but it was a lot heavier than pure NATs. So pure NATs was a lot quicker, and it could handle a lot more throughput, with the only drawback really being at that point something that wasn't necessary for Tazama when publishing rules, because we had to basically have a read once methodology, and for that you can use pure NATs, and it was definitely the fastest. So,
Yeah. I would actually love to go back to Jetstream now that we have a little bit of additional breathing room, because that guaranteed delivery and also the ability to monitor back pressure in the system to be able to tweak your performance in a sort of real-time production setting, I think is also very attractive. So we'll see what happens in the future. Thanks, Majid. Thanks, Foley. And as I wanted to mention here, just one outstanding item here. The multi-rule and the multi-typology posting at the moment reuses the back-end service for posting a typology, which means that even though from the user's perspective, you can send in an array of typologies, the admin service itself basically just iterates over that single write at a time for the entire batch of arrays or arrayed items. That does create a bit of a problem. It does make it a little bit slower. So if I'm doing this across machines on my home network, it times out. Even though the transaction completes, the front end times out after like 5 seconds, which is what I have it set to at the moment. So it would be better for us to also just update that backend service to be able to handle all of these typologies in the array as a single write action instead of 33 separate write actions. So that is an outstanding task at the moment, but we didn't deem that critical for now. We may get that in before the release, depending on capacity, but it's likely that that will be a post-release feature that we will roll out. Okay. That is everything that I had for today. Before I do that, what I also did want to mention is we are effectively going into a features freeze now. The final features that have been developed and delivered by Basis, which was the simulation sandbox, has now also been deployed into the beta sandbox. So that is also available for testing and exploration. That concludes all of the features that we had planned for release 4. So we are effectively freezing features development for now. Only going to attend to any final bug fixes or any immediate high priority usability fixes. And then we're going to go straight into our release 4, which, as I mentioned, would hopefully be in the next week or so. Thank you very much for everybody who has helped and worked very hard. Oh, yes. There are 2 things maybe also to look forward to. Sandy said that we should do a show and tell for the demo UI for release 4. I don't know if I want to do that now. Maybe. Is this also new? I can't remember. Did we Did I tell you guys that we updated the demo for the sandbox?
You showed it to us last week.
Did I? Okay, that's why Sandy was on holiday at the time. So thank you, Sandy. Yes. So the demo is also updated for the sandbox, and you can log into it, and then you can explore the sandbox and there's some enhancements in there. So as a reminder, thank you very much. Thanks, Sandy. So yes, features freeze, and then we're going to go into our release, and then finally just open to the floor. Any questions from anybody before we sign off for the day? All right. Thank you very much, everyone. In 2 weeks' time, we will probably not be having a TSC meeting. We are at an on-site meeting that week. It might be a little bit challenging for us to attend. But in 4 weeks' time, we will be doing a presentation and a demo for a piece of work that was granted to us by Delta Analytics. They have developed some dashboards for us, and also they implemented a LLM chatbot for Tazama. So they will be demoing that to us and the community at the TSC meeting 4 weeks from now in July. We will be posting that on our Slack channel as well, so look out for that. And please tell your friends and bring everyone to come and have a look at the work that they did for us. We had a dry run demo a week ago, and it looks amazing. So very, very grateful for that piece of work, and really excited to be able to show it to everybody in the community as well. So please join us in 4 weeks' time. I think, Sandy, is that the 16th of July?
That's
I can't
right.
remember now. Yes, 16th of July. So we'll see everybody again on the 16th of July. Thanks, everybody. Good luck. Enjoy your day and your evening.
Thank you. Pretty exciting stuff.
Justice.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Till next time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Goodbye.
Majid. Bye-bye.